You've come to this video either to learn about the Lexus LC500 or the Lexus V8 ownership experience, and I promise you this is not some clickbait fest. I'm going to tell you why I bought this car, what it's been like to own it, and what I'm thinking about in the future. And I've taken this out at Autobahn Country Club, and a big thanks to them and Lexus for allowing me to explore this car's limits and do some special modifications to it to kind of walk you through what the car is and what it isn't. You may be in the market for a car like this at around $106,000, as this was MSRP, or if you're looking at the used market, because the 2018s typically carry the lowest buy-in, I'm going to tell you what my experience is with this car after about a year. Now, my first review video, and you can watch all those, I'll link them here. I've done a ton of videos. I'm not going to cover every detail, but the first video I did was called Finally Something Original, and after about 3 years of being in and out of multiple press cars and driving this, I still feel the same way. That's one of the things that's kept me excited about this car. It's almost kept me wanting to keep it long term, because every time I get on the inside, it's very, very unique, and the outside is extremely unique. And just because it's original doesn't make it good either. You have to be a fan of this style car and what they're trying to do. To me, this is quintessential Japanese GT kind of sports car feel. It's what I've always expected and what I've always wanted from something like a brand like Lexus. So I have this huge affinity to the way things are laid out, the way things feel and look, and I like that. I'm spending a lot of money. I want to feel that specialness here, and that's what I get. So the other part, one of the main reasons I bought this car is it's got one of the best dual personalities I've ever experienced in a modern car. When you're cruising along in traffic and you're stuck behind cars and you're like, holy shit, I can't deal with this anymore, this car literally turns into the perfect luxury mobile. It is quiet, super quiet. There's no drone, there's no exhaust noise, there's no engine noise, there's no vibration from it, and the audio system's amazing. You can just sit in traffic and you'd be like, okay, I can deal with the fact that I'm not, that I'm wasting all this engine power and like all this sound by sitting there, because it is such a wonderful experience to ride around in it. But when I want to be a dick, all I have to do is press down the throttle by an inch and the exhaust comes alive. The induction noise comes alive. There's no fake engine noise here. There's no even option to turn it on and off. It just doesn't exist. When you drive it, and I'm not kidding you, you can hear this car 2 blocks away. The induction noise, the exhaust noise, the way that they design those two things together is what makes this car feel special to drive, and it's something you cannot possibly understand until you drive it for a couple days.
The head of the company puts on a 5-point harness and gets in the car at the Nürburgring and drives flat out. That's pretty cool.
I met him so many times, but mostly they're in the car, behind the wheel. That's a very unique case for chief engineer and the CEO is talking each other in the car.
Yeah.
When I saw the concept car, it's beautiful, but I said it's impossible to make it real. But Akio-san's answer is, that's the reason. We need a challenge. That's shock. Yeah, that's the beginning.
Akio's involvement in getting the LC500 was paramount.
I worked with Akio-san for this car since almost 5 years. He never asked me the specs. Always he drive the car. How did it feel the car? Cannot be measured. So that's the value of the Lexus brand from now on. So we want to provide more emotional value for the customer. It's not in the brochure.
The horsepower numbers and the numbers do not sell it. This is not a fast car in a straight line, although it's completely adequate and exciting to listen to the engine noise. This, to me, is the last of its kind. It has this very muscle car-ish sound, but this ultimate refinement at the same time, and that's why I love it. What do I hate about it? Well, some of the things I detest are all its constant beeps and alerts that it gives you. Like if I turn off the car and leave the window down, it's gonna beep. If I don't have my seatbelt on for like 20 seconds, it just goes insane. If I leave the door open, it beeps. If I leave the trunk open, it beeps. It's just like, you know, I'm spending a lot of money on this car, and I would sign a waiver, anything, to get rid of all this. And you can code some of it out through TechStream. Your dealership can turn some things off, but we were not able to figure out how to turn everything off. Like the traction stability control warning light that comes on. Like, yes, I know I've turned it off. You got lights on the dash. Why do I need this message that blocks everything out? It's like the safety stuff. I feel like Toyota has been burned, and now legally, like their legal department's like crazy about overdoing it, because a lot of cars don't do this, and it just pisses me off. The other thing that I detest about this car, the more I've used it, is its practicality. This is enormous. All you have to do is look at it for 5 minutes and see it in person. It is a boat of a car. And you think, okay, there's gonna be some storage. The door pockets are too small. I can't fit a bottle in there. It always flies out. The armrest is tiny. It holds a phone and maybe a cable. The center cup holder is usable, but then if you have a big bottle, it hits the HVAC controls. The glove box is tiny. The back seats are so small. You literally have to have the front seats so far forward. Otherwise, the person is actually putting their feet on the seats in the back. And the trunk is not good. Even on the V8 here, the trunk is still small. You're gonna do grocery shopping, a couple small bags, but that's about it. If you have the hybrid or the convertible, it gets even smaller. And I think, to me, that is a big detractor of this car, because as much as I would love driving it every day, it's definitely not practical. The other part is my insurance has gone up over the past couple of years on this, or the past year, and I've seen the rates go up since it was launched. And obviously, as more cars get into accidents, the more the claims go up. But things like the trunk lid, because it is CSMC, it is a carbon composite, much like the doors. The trunk lid is like $10,000 retail. The doors are insanely expensive as well. And the rest is kind of aluminum in the front. And surprisingly, the fenders are cheap. The hood is pretty affordable, but that trunk and the doors are insane. And, you know, it's going to cause your insurance bill to be higher. So that's something else to look at before you go in. So what else do we have here? I opted for the Performance Pack, which is now the Dynamic Handling Pack. You get carbon fiber door sills, you get Alcantara headliner, you get the carbon fiber roof, and of course the Alcantara seats as well. And I think it adds a huge touch to this interior. It makes it feel more special. The rigidity added by the carbon on the roof could be debated, but when you get into the LC500 convertible compared to the coupe, that is where you notice it, because they are vastly different in terms of rigidity and the way that the cars feel. So what else is there to talk about on the interior and living with this car? Well, the seats are amazing, except for me, I have problems in longer road trips. I do have rib pain from it, and I'm not quite sure why. I've never had a rib injury before. I mean, I've done karting, I've gotten blasted, but I always had a rib belt, so I've never had like any serious stuff. But this car, I just can never seem to get comfortable enough where my side isn't hurting. And it's one of those things you definitely don't know until you get into the car, but it's something I would test out. The last thing is electronics, and with the frontal and rear sensors, this car is enormous in the front. And I'm not kidding you, like where you look where your driving position is versus how much space there is in front of you, the fact that I can't see the front of the car from my driving position makes it difficult to park. And this is one of the few cars I've ever actually driven it up on a curb, and the front sensors did not pick it up. The rear sensors are a little bit better at judging distance, and of course you have a backup camera, but the resolution of the camera system in the back, it's like I'd almost rather not have it. It is just so bad. I mean, I know it's mandated that you have backup cameras, but for a car in this price range, these systems, if they're going to be implemented, should be essentially top of the line, and it's not. Now, there are a lot of options in this price range, and I just got out of a series of cars, and I kind of rolled over some money for my corporate job. The last vehicle I had was the Ariel Atom 3S, and I've always wanted that car since I was in my 20s, and the idea of it was better than the reality. In Illinois, especially, you know, in the winter, you're parked, In the summer, it's usually too hot and humid to bake in that car. In the rain or inclement weather or any type of colder weather, it turns into a motorcycle experience, and it just, I was over it so fast. And to top that off, it's not a car I particularly enjoy driving on the track either. So this is a huge swing. And when I looked at it, I'm like, I want something that gives me some emotional connection to it, the sound, the feeling, the harmonics of it. When I want to drive it, I want to be able to go sideways. I want to be able to be stupid with it. And then I want the perfect cruising experience. When I'm stressed out, working a lot, the last thing I want to do, standing outside all day filming cars or editing or whatever, is to get into a car that I feel like I'm doing work to drive. And the LC is the farthest thing from that. Now, I leased it pre-COVID or at the start of COVID when inventory was not moving. And I had a lot more flexibility in terms of negotiation. So I did lease it because I wasn't sure I was going to keep it. And the original MSRP was like $106,095, and it's fully loaded. This is the maxed out coupe you can get. And I got about $4,000 or $5,000 off of the price. And this is a car that I'm probably going to turn in when the lease is ending and then buy one outright. Spec it out, not going to beat it up like I did this one. And one of the things that I hate silver cars because every car is silver, white, or black. I wanted silver, and it's mainly because it works really well on the LC because of the headlight and the taillight design. The bezels or the little trim pieces that are on this car stay the same color across all the models. They stay this gunmetal silver. So on this darker atomic silver car, those silver accents seamlessly blend into the paint color, and it just makes it more cohesive. That's why I wanted it more so. Otherwise, I would have got a yellow or an orange or the structural blue that they basically didn't release except for one model year on the coupe. So I feel like it looks good for this type of car. The audio system is remarkable in here. It's really good for the size of this space, but of course they didn't add Android Auto in this car until 2021, and you can't go back to the 2020 model, which is what I have, and get it. You can't retro do it, so I'm either stuck with running an iPhone in here for best audio quality, putting a USB key, or using like a DVD audio or a CD because it still has a CD player. Now, I'm going to take you in the shop real quick and talk about some of the mechanical stuff before I take it for a drive. Underneath the LC500, my other videos go into greater detail about this car, so I'm going to give you a crash course. In 2018, it's released. Represents the most technology they can pack in a more mass-produced product. It's shared with the LS500 and, of course, the LC500. However, the LC500 has a lot more technology, a lot more aluminum, forged aluminum control arms. This is basically the most money they can throw at it in that $100,000 price range. So in 2018, the car comes out, the biggest deficiency is it rides way too rough. And at first I thought maybe it was the run flats, but it really was the damper settings. So in 2019 and 2020, they changed the electronic control, and the dampers had individual rebound and compression settings, and it made a world of difference, at least 100% better. And I've talked to people that have wanted to go out and buy these. They've messaged me, and I said, drive them back to back, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And they all agreed and went to the 2019 or 2020. However, if you're in the used market, the 2018 is a great value because it's the cheapest ones you can get. And if you want to tinker around with modification, suspension, or anything else, that's the model year to do it. Now, in 2019 and 2020, they've also made continual revisions to the automatic transmission programming, trying to get that mid-RPM, the low RPM smoothed out in terms of clunkiness. This transmission performs amazing when you're going foot to the floor, shifting at a high RPM. But when you're just kind of driving around or shifting in the mid RPM range, it gets a bit clunky. So every year they've tried to refine and smooth that out. Now we've been in the 2021s, and while it is slightly better, it's not night and day difference from the 2019s and 2020s where like, oh, I have to have the 2021. So just keep that in mind. The reason I chose the 2019 or 2020 model year is because for all the new cars, 21 going forward, they have made changes to the suspension again and have softened it up. They've given it more compression in the rear. It's softened the ride. They've changed the front lower control arm to forged aluminum. These are steel on all the previous cars. They've tried to give the car a little bit more compliance in connection with the Lexus driving signature. So when you drive the newer cars, you notice right away, they have way more, just a little bit more float to them. They are softer. They are more of a luxury car ride. And they have also added the addition of a brake torque vectoring to it. And that's something that I did not want electronically controlled braking to help you turn in, because if I took it to the track, I didn't want that interference with the car. So the 21 is just adding a little bit more tech, a little bit more refinement. There is the better suspension additions, but again, these are the things that you got to look at when you're dealing with it. Now, I will tell you one thing from driving all these cars: the performance pack on the older cars, or they renamed it or remarketed it to the dynamic handling package, where you get variable gear ratio steering from JTech. So with the variable gear ratio steering on that package, you turn it a little bit, you turn a little bit more, the gear ratio changes and it makes the steering quicker. They combine that with the rear wheel steering module. When you're dealing with a long ass car like this, a big long wheelbase vehicle, having the rear steer and the variable gear ratio makes this car feel way smaller than it is. On the street and on the track, you're doing less turnover of the wheel, you're doing less correction, and you're focused more on making subtle inputs, and that this car rotates way better. So if you like driving, that performance pack or dynamic handling package is a must-have to this vehicle. There's no doubt about it. It's not a waste of money. And obviously having the Torsen, which is baked into that package, again, it's a must-have. Now the problem is the convertible, because of the way the rear subframe is designed, you cannot fit the rear wheel steering module in the convertible. That's why that is not an option. So again, they're trying to make these subtle changes to the body and the platform of the car as it ages. Now, one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to see what this car was like from a performance perspective. The biggest deficiency with the LC500, there's no transcooler and there's no engine oil cooler, something that the ISF, the GSF, and of course the RCF got. Now, the components are similar, except the 10-speed is totally different in transmission. So you couldn't swap over the transcooler from the 8-speed automatic, but you could technically probably retrofit the oil cooler that was in the RCF GSF into the LC500 with a custom bracket. I'm not going to attempt it. I just don't care about it. This is not a track car, but you could think about it from performance. But you're still going to have to deal with the fact that the trans fluid will overheat on this car before the oil temperature gets too high, so you're still going to have to deal with that. In terms of braking on the street, they've changed the brake pads on the performance pack or the dynamic handling pack near 2020 because people were complaining they were too noisy. So they did a brake pad revision. They're quieter, but the temperature threshold from my testing is not as good as the stock pads from the previous generation, and again, there's no going back. So what I've done is I contacted G-Lock and I had them make a custom set of R12 pads for this thing, front and rear, and I had Arlington Lexus change everything out, do a Group 5 synthetic, made sure they bled the brakes because this is brake-by-wire, so there is a procedure with a laptop plugged in OBD2 where you need to set the actuators to bleed this, so that's an extra step. So they swapped the pads, removed the brake pad wear sensors, so I could get this out on track and see what it was like to drive this more flat out without having to worry about brake fade, brake fluid boiling over. I also changed the fluid to that, to modal brake fluid. And I really wanted to see what it was like pushing this car to the limit before the trans temperature got too high, the engine oil temperature got too high, and see what was left off the table. Now, I've also put on these smaller wheels, the 20-inch wheels, instead of the 21s, the forged ones I took off, and I put these because you could get a set of Eagle Goodyear Supercar 3. That's the stickiest tire in that stock tire size that you can only get in the 20-inch setting. So I put these on here, and what I found is the car definitely has enough dynamic camber to it, because I have to run the front tires at 26 cold and the back about 30 cold to get this car to neutralize out the understeer on track. So when you're driving hard, if you keep the tire temperatures at that stock pressure with these tires specifically, and that front tire pressure gets too high, above like 34, all it does is understeer. So if you start at 26 with a tire like this, and about at 30 is the sweet spot, you get about 4 laps where it neutralizes out some of the understeer and the back starts to rotate with you. So these are the things that I started to play with. But by about lap 7, trans temperature got too high, and then oil temperature was right behind it. So again, you're limited to what you can do with this car, but I feel like suspension-wise, there is enough camber to have fun. You notice, at least on tire wear on these tires, it's not rolling over the tire. There's enough mechanical grip when you lower the pressures a bit on here, and it is quite fun to drive, and I've had people on track, and they are impressed with how much capability is in this car, even though it is a giant barge. So we're gonna head out to Autobahn Country Club. Big thanks to Arlington Lexus, Tony, and of course, Rob Slack, who did all the work on this car. They made sure everything was set up, tightened down before I went out and did this project. And obviously Autobahn and their fleet of performance cars from Lexus, we were able to get all these cars on track at once, just so I can kind of walk you through what it's like to drive. As we know, I like the LC500, and it's one of these cars that is not at all for the track. But I found myself taking it out here more and more just for the hell of it. Just because why not? Listen to it. So, it's soft. It's designed as a street car to be that ultimate like GT car, and that's exactly what it is. And you know, really, even in the hardest setting, the suspension just has a lot of give. It's got a lot of float, and then the fact that you can't change the alignment at all kind of kills the fact that you're just stuck with this car as is. And when I say as is, it's amazing for what it is. It's super easy to get around. It feels way smaller than it really is with the rear wheel steering. It makes such an enormous difference. And the transmission, let's talk about that. You know, we talk about the 8-speed and how archaic it feels. When you're driving this flat out, it's like a dual clutch. Obviously, it suffers greatly in the lower RPM, and every year they kind of retune the suspension or retune the transmission performance to try to improve that clunkiness. But I mean, you just listen to how this thing cracks off shifts. Overall, you know, this is a car that I love. It's one of my favorite modern cars ever created. It's got the character, it's got the luxury, it's got the balance, it's got the uniqueness. It's just huge. And because they didn't address any type of cooling, and I don't know, you know, it could be a lot more, and I think that's my biggest disappointment. If they re-released this car with some cooling, trans cooler, engine oil cooler, you know, did some suspension work for the enthusiast people, I think it would be an amazing car. But as is, you know, this is a 9 out of 10. The fact that I can't even do this a little bit is amazing. So, with that said, let's just drive this until it gets the trans temperature too high to drive anymore. Final thoughts on the LC500, my personal vehicle. I can tell you unequivocally that I've probably driven this car harder and more than 99% of the people on the planet, with the exception of the people that designed it and were doing the engineering on it. I've beat the shit out of it on the track, and it's not even designed to do that. I've been a monkey on the street. I've driven all these press cars, and somebody asked me, would you buy this car again? And I would say 100% yes. It's one of my favorite cars I've ever owned, and I think there are things that could take it from good to great. They've left some things off the table, which I've talked about in the mechanical parts of this during the drive, and then also the technology part. But really, what you're looking at this car as is it's something unique for the time period that it was released. It's got this old school character that no longer exists in modern cars. And just understanding some of the development, the people that were involved, I know that they got in this thing and they're like, we need to amp it up. We need to give it that engine and transmission character, that sound, that noise. And it's almost, to me, I feel like they got in this car, they're like, just turn it up to a 10. You know what? fuck it, let's just make it ridiculous. And that's what it is, and you can't appreciate it until you drive it. Now, yes, it's not the fastest thing. It's not the prettiest thing. It's not particularly maybe not gonna age that well with the technology deficiencies, but its driving character is something that there's nothing else that's like it. And that's what makes it unique. And in 10 years, when we're in the EV hybridization world of everything and maybe fuel cell, you know, you're gonna look back at this car and be like, man, I miss those days. And that's the general feel I get behind the wheel of this car when I'm going sideways and being a dick or just cruising on the highway. So, you know, hopefully this helps you make a decision on this car, whether you're buying it used or new. And again, we'll see you next video.